Mm. This clues idea is quite big. Recorded? That's my fault, sorry.
Okay. Perfect. Right, kia ora everyone. Welcome to our final session on day one of our Power Up conference. I'd like to introduce Kylie Thompson from the University of Otago, who's going to talk to us about the making of people in PE, which I'm really excited about. Oh, what did I say? Oh, sorry, University of Waikato. I've had an absolute shocker this morning. That's my bad. I'm just going to hand over, Kylie. Take it away. You fix this from here, and we'll be in touch soon. Sorry about that.
No worries. Well, kia ora everyone. Thanks for tuning in after what can only probably be described as a mammoth term that you've all had. So yeah, my name's Kylie Thompson. I'm currently teaching health and PE and teacher education programs at the University of Waikato. I've been around the PE tracks for a wee while now, so I was up in Auckland before I came down here, and have taught in schools, been head of department, and actually worked for PENS for a year as an advisor like you guys, and also, you know, places like NZQA and so on. So I'm really excited now to be in teacher education, working with, you know, these aspiring people that are keen to enter our profession. Now I'm working with two sort of screens here at the moment, so bear with me if I am not flicking. There we go. So this webinar will kick off. What we're aiming to explore today is how notions of people making are conceptualized in PE and how we might approach the teaching of social and moral capabilities. So in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm hoping that we might cover these 3 points. And that is to think critically about the place and potential of people making in PE, explore current practice for teaching social and moral capabilities, and then I'm really keen to finish off with you guys considering your future teaching practice through the use of 3 provocations that I've developed. To start with, it's also probably useful to clarify that when I use the term people making in this presentation, I'm sort of referring tongue-in-cheek to the parts of our job that are concerned with teaching those sort of social, emotional and moral skills and dispositions. Yeah, so the part of PE that's concerned with learning things like interpersonal skills and moral reasoning through the context of movement. All right. So if there is anyone there in the chat rooms, I'm not sure if there is, but if there is, it would be great if you could just enter a really quick response to this question to kick us off. So without overthinking it, what was it that attracted you to teaching physical education? We often talk about teaching being synonymous with making a difference, but I'm really keen to hear what you might have been hoping to contribute when you entered this profession. And I understand that there's a little bit of a delay, so I'll just sort of keep talking and hopefully something might pop up there. But back when I was putting together a personal statement for my master's thesis that I did a few years ago, I actually hunted out my old Dunedin Teachers College application, which was written back in the day. You had to explain why you wanted to be a teacher as part of the application process. Anyway, I thought I would share with you a snapshot from a 21-year-old bright-eyed, bushy-tailed Kylie. So this is what I said, hoping that they would pick me to enter the course. I've just taken a little extract. And so I started by saying that my motivation to become a PE teacher comes from the will to walk alongside young people during an exciting, turbulent and important stage of their lives. Over the past 4 years of study and a Bachelor of PE degree, I've learned a massive amount about the technicalities of sport, exercise, physiology, biomechanics, motor learning, and physical activity, all of these important parts of the physical education curriculum. While these things interest me a lot, they are not the things that excite me most about teaching. I now see these things more as a valuable context to help students to be happy, caring, empowered, and resilient people. So I can see that a couple of you are entering some really nice stuff in the chat there, and there's that word empower, being inspired by other teachers. You love sport, you wanted to influence others, so that's really cool to hear. You can see from my little excerpt that I thought I was born for this people-making stuff, and Arnold's notion of learning through movement was where it was all at for me. So here I was, 21 years old, about to embark on my dream job, with big aspirations to support the development of good little citizens. And a bit like the Lego characters in this image, I think I probably had thoughts of being something like a master builder, equipping them with their metaphorical lightsabers to thrive out there in the world. I got to decide what good citizens were and what skills should be valued, and what a great job I thought that would be. So all the crucial things that I thought I would be helping set them up for life, like communication, empathy, cooperation, leadership, problem solving, moral reasoning, and all the things that we keep hearing should be part of a good quality 21st century education system, right? We young people, I guess, are meant to be suitably equipped to deal with a rapidly changing world. What I didn't consider at the beginning of my career, though, was how bloody complex, slippery, and values-based this stuff can actually be. We make sense of the social and moral domains in diverse ways, but I think my simplistic view of teaching was that I would just be supporting students in an unproblematic way to be my version of good people, not just about in PE, but also out there in the big wide world. So in my head, I thought I knew what a good citizen was and how they should behave. So how hard could it be? You know, even after there were models for this stuff, you know, Hallison taught me those 5 hand signals for taking personal and social responsibility, and Sidentop showed me over the last how to teach sport education, not just sport. So, you know, while these models, I think, did a lot to help support me with good pedagogical tools for teaching this stuff, I've found that over the last decade, I've started to challenge some of those simplistic assumptions that I might have held a little earlier on in my career. And so what usually happens when we start to apply a critical lens to anything, I ended up with way more questions than I had answers. And recently I've been biting the ears off some super brainy PE academics down here. So people like Lizette Burrows, Kirsten Petrie, Marg Cosgriff, and Jenny Robertson have all been really amazing to help me unpack this, and have encouraged me to keep asking questions. And, you know, it turns out I may have accidentally enrolled in 4 or 5 years more of a PhD asking these sorts of questions too. I'm just having a quick look at that chat. It's great to read, you know, all the reasons that people were interested in joining this profession. You know, I'm seeing Katie, the way that PE taught people how to work together as a team, develop leadership skills and so on. So some really neat stuff there. Okay. So, like our own students often respond when they're being stretched a little, I think I was the same. I found myself thinking, damn you critical thinking. And, you know, this was supposed to be easy. And I think my previously simplistic vision of teaching PE was completely tipped upside down when I started asking some questions. So instead of being some sort of pseudo life coach, I actually now find myself asking the following 5 questions that I wanted to share with you. And as I go through these questions, it would be really cool if you wanted to record any comments or share any relevant experiences in the chat as they come to mind. Just caught Celia saying, "Go, Kylie, it is distracting. Carl told me to shut it. Maybe I should shut the chat off." Okay, so the first question that I asked myself was, if our learning focus is on well-being and supporting the development of good citizens, then which belief systems are valued and reflected in our teaching of this stuff? So we know that schools in New Zealand are really rich multi-ethnic learning sites with students with, a really wide range of diverse backgrounds and different cultural values. But what happens if we only privilege a westernised vanilla version of these social and moral skills and capabilities? As PE teachers, have we considered the place of Te Ao Māori, of Mataranga Māori, and other worldviews in our conceptualisations of things like leadership, communication and problem solving in movement contexts? And some research I came across by Katie Fitzpatrick and Clive Pope found that students in their study perceived that the interpersonal skills they learned in PE were useful to them. So they reflected on improvements in things like confidence, having a voice and the ability to talk with others. However, importantly, some of these students also acknowledged that the learning of those skills in PE raised some really significant challenges for them. So, for example, the teaching of communication skills in their PE classes encouraged them to speak openly and to question others' ideas and opinions. But sometimes this caused conflict for these students, and especially Pacific students who may have had cultural values where respect was shown to their elders by not questioning them. So the second question I asked was, how are the skills and capabilities that we thought were important for us to learn as young people different in today's world? I guess last term's a perfect example of how quickly our world can change. So for many of your students, the teaching of communication and problem solving and moral reasoning and things like that probably didn't happen in the gymnasium much or on the field in the last term. Perhaps you even had a go at teaching these skills on platforms like this, like Zoom or Google Classroom. But even if we ignored that mix of a pandemic being thrown at us for the moment, how have we changed the way we teach these skills to align with the way our world is changing in general? Justin O'Connor and Dawn Penny have recently published a really good article that I highly recommend you get your hands on, and they argue that patterns of participation in sport are changing. And so informal participation in non-traditional activities like skateboarding, parkour, the weekend cycling pelotons or park yoga groups, that they're all beginning to displace some more traditional club-based, formally structured sports. So they're suggesting that in response to this sort of change, that we as physical educators in schools need to actually better align our programs with the teaching of social skills and interactions required to prepare students for, these lifelong informal physical activities. So they argue that the knowledge, skills and understandings required in informal physical activities can be significantly different to traditional formal sporting contexts. And I tend to agree with that. They draw on examples like skateboarders who had to develop skills in communication and negotiation in order just to secure a permanent site for their skateboarding community. Participants of parkour who needed to get social recognition in order to avoid conflict from their community. Runners encouraging and inspiring other participants in the weekends, volunteering to support weekly events and fundraising. These were, all key elements that were needed to sustain a casual sort of parkrun event. So surely it's useful for us to consider how our own programs may or may not be preparing students with these contemporary types of social capabilities. However, I'm not sure I ever really thought about this in my early days of teaching or ever really did anything that contributed towards those sorts of skills. The next question was, how do we support the transfer of learning to our students' wider lives? And this is a tricky one. Transfer is often something that's just assumed when we're teaching these types of skills. The idea that the skills we teach using movement contexts in our PE classes will be transferable to life. And perhaps the question to ask before even answering this one is transfer of learning even possible? That'll get the learning theory geeks really going, but it's a relevant question. So in 2017, Katrin Opstol and others conducted this huge systematic review of the literature on students' personal and social development in PE. And they found that 23 studies did suggest that PE and sports are suitable contexts for learning these skills because of their transferability to other domains in life. Interestingly, however, in all of these studies, the transfer was either assumed or self-reported by the student or the teacher. I think it would be fair to say that transfer of learning is almost impossible to effectively evaluate, but if we are going to assume that it's occurring, then surely we need to be integrating learning activities that explicitly support this. Don Hellison's personal and social responsibility model would certainly advocate for this approach. And teaching as inquiry should also help us to identify specific student needs, but how often are we actually taking time to go through some of these processes? Any of the secondary teachers that are listening are probably all familiar with the student that aces the demonstration of interpersonal skills during a turbo touch unit for 1.5 in the NCEA. But maybe then you're out in the playground at lunchtime and you observe that same student demonstrating, antisocial or really aggressive behaviours towards their peers in lunchtime football matches or even in classroom activities. So this sort of stuff's got me thinking about how teachers can support the development of these capabilities in a way that means they're learning rather than just performing in PE. The fourth question, how can we be more explicit in the way we teach and support the development of social and moral capabilities? I think too often I would just put students in groups and assume that this meant they were automatically learning things like cooperation, communication, or fair play. Maybe I would give them a bit of time for a team talk and get students to come up with their own strategies before I realised that actually in most cases the students they didn't know what they didn't know. So I think explicit teaching really first requires us to identify the skills, the knowledge and the understanding required to support the development of these social and moral capabilities. So taking the time to unpack these concepts might help us to be a little bit more explicit. I've got a hunch that we've got to be comfortable with them being complex and not always trying to simplify them, and being happy with them being a little bit messy in that process. So the examples on this slide just represent some snippets maybe of my own early practice, as well as some conversations that I've had with student teachers over the years. So when I go out to schools and observe their teaching on practicums, and often the conversation goes something like this. I might say, what was your learning intention today, Johnny? He might say, oh, I was teaching students cooperation. That's great, Johnny. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you did in your lesson to teach cooperation? Well, I ran ABL games and they had to work in groups. That sounds great. Can you tell me a bit more about the specific knowledge, skills, understanding that the students maybe needed to have in order to cooperate effectively? How did you go about supporting the learning of this? And often they might respond, I didn't really think of that. I just thought if I set up the activity, then they would do it and cooperation might just happen. So I'm not sure if any of you have thought about that yourselves and thought about how you might be explicitly teaching some of those skills. And then this final question. And so while I admit to being a little bit tongue-in-cheek about, this term people making, this is one of the overarching questions that's occasionally asked of our profession. Should we even be trying to do this stuff in PE? And is it even part of our job description to teach this? So, historically, there's always been debate about whether or not PE is an appropriate or a unique context for teaching social and moral capabilities. and therefore questions about whether or not it should be part of our core business are probably important to be asking too. If any of you are familiar with Tinning's work, you'll know that, he argues that, from a modest pedagogy, he refers to these first order objectives as being the physical skills and kind of warns that they should take priority over second order objectives like these social and interpersonal skills. Even Peter Arnold himself, the man who introduced that concept of learning through movement to the PE community, has questioned whether physical activities are actually unique in their ability to provide the through learning stuff, over other subjects like art or drama. So I think, they're interesting questions to ask as well. While I think it's important to acknowledge those questions, that Tinning has and acknowledge that not everyone is comfortable with a mandate for teaching this stuff, I think overwhelmingly in the literature, PE is still presented as a beneficial context where, students are supported to develop social and moral capabilities. PE has long been associated with presenting students with learning intentions that help them recognise and manage their emotions, establish healthy relationships, set positive goals and social needs, and solve problems and so on. And I think, the reality here in New Zealand is that we have a curriculum document with multiple references to this people-making stuff. Sure, how a curriculum is operationalised is always dependent on how we interpret it. My phone's just ringing. I'm just going to do the old hang up thing, whoopsie daisy. But it's difficult to deny some of these excerpts that I've put up on the screen. They're taken from the NZC, that they're not reflective of a curriculum that values and promotes the teaching of social and moral skills. And then, of course, we've got strand C. We've got a whole strand of achievement objectives devoted to the development of relationships with others. So I feel pretty confident that it is in our brief here. Okay, so that said, and while I personally feel comfortable that the teaching of these capabilities is within our brief, like I said, I do strongly believe that we still need to think carefully about what we're aiming to achieve in this space. As PE teachers, I think we have a responsibility to acknowledge the risks that come with these sort of oversimplified interpretations of terms like people making. And therefore, in order to be responsible, critical pedagogues in our teaching of this sort of slippery stuff, I've come up with a bit of a disclaimer here. So number one, I think firstly we need to acknowledge that our students come to us with their own worldviews and experiences. We need to support and acknowledge diversity in our teaching of these social and moral capabilities. Secondly, I think as teachers, we need to acknowledge that there will be a number of other determinants at play that will impact on our students' ability to demonstrate social and moral capabilities. PE does not operate in a silo. And so, while our focus should be on teaching skills, knowledge and understanding, I'm not so sure about it should be on judging student behaviours. The third disclaimer is that I think this people-making stuff comes with a dominant value base, and we as teachers need to be willing to ask the hard questions of ourselves and maybe to recognise that context matters. There's not just one right way to communicate or collaborate, lead or problem solve. And I think, finally, we should also, like Tinning does suggest, we should be careful of trying to do too much. We're not life coaches, and our students shouldn't be perceived as projects that need fixing. There's a lot we can, I think, contribute in this area in terms of the development of social and moral capabilities, but there is also a line that I think we need to be careful not to cross. So, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this disclaimer. If you wouldn't mind jumping on the chat and letting me know if there's anything you would add or change when it comes to this disclaimer. And maybe because I'm already trying to watch two screens, Heather could just let me know what sort of things you pop in there at the end. Okay, so with all that in mind then, and the disclaimers and the fine print, I thought we'd have a quick look at, one of the big shifts that's occurred in our approach to teaching this stuff, and that's been the introduction of models-based practice. And for any of you that have, been in the last conference presentation with Shane, then you've had a really great insight into models-based practice and teaching styles and so on. So I guess when we look at models-based practice, there's not really clear agreement in the field about what a model is or what might constitute models-based practice. But Hastie and Casey suggest that it's a blueprint which describes certain procedures for organising content, task structures, and the sequencing of learning activities. There's some non-negotiable features that make it distinctive. And, models-based practice has increased, like Shane said, a lot over the last few years. It really appears to be a key part of physical education now. And, I spend a lot of time with my own students looking at models-based practice and the implementation of them. And I think if they're implemented well, then there's a lot of potential there for developing, social and moral capabilities. And, I think that they actually have a huge amount to offer. So I'm sure that most of you are familiar with at least one or two of the models that are on this slide. I'm just looking at the time, and it probably doesn't allow a full review of these models, but these were the ones that I think are probably aligned most closely with teaching moral and social capabilities. So you've got the sport education model, Side and Tops model, which aims to provide an authentic sport experience. Students creating teams, they play a season of games, but the overriding theme is one of participation, playing and celebrating. So I think students are taught social and moral capabilities in sport education, and that happens not just through their participation as a player, but in a number of other roles such as officials and managers and so on. You've got TPSR, and when I talked before about the 5 levels, where students self-assess where they are operating, and again that's a model that can help us teach responsibility. So this approach in PE has a focus on students becoming more caring and responsible by giving them opportunities to support and help each other. I guess the ultimate aim of TPSR is to take this attitude from inside the gym to the wider school or community, into the world that they live in. Cooperative learning model focuses on students working together in small groups to master subject matter, so things like problem-solving activities and even sport-related contexts. And the structure of that model really essentially gives the students joint responsibility of both the content, and it ensures that their peers learn as well, and which puts the teacher in more of a facilitatory kind of role. And then ABL, which you're probably all familiar with, that's sequenced adventure activities, which are designed to provide, quite specific personal and social development outcomes. ABL uses cooperative games, trust activities, problem-solving activities, and it uses the experiential learning cycle too, which I think can be really beneficial when teaching some of this stuff. I think it is important when we look at models-based practice, however, that we don't just treat models as the magic bullet to all our problems. While I agree that models are an important tool in our teacher toolkit, I think it would be a mistake to just ignore everything else and make them the default program. I'm not sure what you guys think about that, and it'd be interesting after the session you've had before me, if you were in that one, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But, considering some of the questions I raised earlier and some of the points, I think, the key philosophical messages in our New Zealand curriculum are also really important to consider when teaching social and moral capabilities. And, some of those messages weren't necessarily considered in the development of these models. So while models have no doubt helped shift practice away from that dominant traditional model of education, I think we should also remember that many of them were articulated without much concern of the sort of differing place, context or cultures. And most of them were conceptualized at least a couple of decades ago, you know, when the world was probably a very different place to the one we're currently experiencing. So it's not to say that I don't think models have a place or that they're not beneficial. I think they are fantastic. They have a huge amount to offer. But I think in taking a critical approach in teaching social and moral capabilities, that we should definitely consider adapting them, modifying them, and certainly contextualizing them to meet the needs of our own students. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a moment here because that's a lot that I've just talked about. But I'm really keen to get you guys to reflect on your own practice. You know, to think about what I've been saying and maybe consider some of the wins and some of the challenges that you have had yourselves in teaching social and moral capabilities in PE. And you know, while you're just doing that, I'm going to go through 3 provocations that I've developed and I'm continually tinkering with, but I think they might be quite useful when we think about teaching this stuff. And yeah, so if you could just maybe share some of your wins and challenges in the chat, you know, on my other screen over here, that would be fantastic. Okay, so the first provocation I've come up with is how teachers make sense of social and moral capabilities matters. And so, you know, our views are framed with particular values or perspectives, and this affects everything that we do. So I don't think it's about simplifying the concepts, but I think we need to be comfortable with their messiness so that we can really take time to support the richness and depth of some of these capabilities. You know, things like problem solving, leadership, communication, they're actually really deep and complex, sometimes troublesome concepts. And so, you know, taking time to make sense of them and really unpacking what we think they are, considering the cultural context that we operate in and the environment that our students are living in is I think, really important. So if we, you know, an example of this would be, you know, if we only teach communication in a traditional way that highlights a really kind of technical, process-oriented approach, like, you know, telling students to use names, ensuring eye contact, active listening, and giving clear instructions, then we might actually miss some really important ideas here. You know, things like context matters when it comes to communication, and that, in fact, you know, students need to know how to change the way they communicate depending on what they are needing to communicate for. So, you know, communication can be different for extroverts and introverts, and that's not saying that one way of communicating is better or worse, but how often do we explore that? Sometimes active listening isn't always the right thing to do in certain circumstances. Maybe if people are being racist or sexist or bullying or whatever, they don't require a space to be actively listened to. And maybe our students could be supported on how to, you know, shut down some of those conversations. You know, my all-time favorite of that kind of calling a name before passing a ball doesn't always mean we're improving our communication skills either. One way of doing this, you know, might be through the use of threshold concepts. And I know, Heather, if you're still on here, that you've been exploring the use of these. And Rotatuna, with Anne Mackay and I have been working with them quite closely. And they've done some really great work around unpacking the troublesome knowledge that sits behind these complex sort of capabilities. You know, if anyone's interested in exploring this further, I'm sure Amy Coco wouldn't mind me saying that you could get in touch with her, or even in Heather as well. So my second provocation is that the teaching of social and moral capabilities is both everywhere and nowhere. I think if we decide that teaching this stuff is an important part of our role as PE teachers, then surely it's advantageous to apply an explicit approach to our teaching of this stuff. That doesn't mean we have to adopt a teacher command style, but rather maybe we could do more than just put students in groups and hope that learning, miraculously occurs, which was what I was guilty of doing in some of my earlier practice, for sure. So I think taking the time to identify the skills, the knowledge and the understanding, required for these capabilities will help us to teach more explicitly, and facilitate some really beneficial learning experiences. And the third and final provocation is that evaluating students' social and moral capabilities is slippery business. Judging our students' interpersonal behaviours may not always be a fair evaluation of their learning of the skills, knowledge and understanding. There's so much stuff going on in their lives and their upbringings, their socioeconomic, the world, all that kind of stuff. So considering how social determinants also impact on student capabilities in this area, I think we need to think carefully about what's reasonable when we're looking to evaluate learning of social and moral capabilities. Like I said before, I think a focus on the skills, the knowledge and understanding that they've learnt over the unit might be more effective than just judging behaviours, the immediate behaviours in front of us. However, the research on evaluating these types of skills is really sparse. So I would love to hear how some of you might be approaching this. The stuff that's outside, maybe just the templates that we've had for 1.5 and so on in the secondary space. So I guess in summary, and given these provocations, that I'd love to leave you with thinking about what questions they might raise when you use them to reflect on your own practice. It'd be great to hear if any of these ideas have sparked or prompted any thinking. I've got the chat out the corner of my eye, and I can see there's a bit of stuff going on there. So I'll leave some time to maybe answer any questions. But thank you for listening. It's always a bit strange doing a spiel to the computer, so it is nice to know that there are a few of you out there. There's my email address if any of you are keen to follow this up after this session. As I said before, I may have accidentally signed away the next 4 or 5 years looking at this stuff for a PhD, and any help that I can get along the way would be very much appreciated. I'm really, really passionate about this stuff and really keen to talk to teachers. You guys are out there doing this, and I know you've got some amazing, fabulous ideas about how to do this in a really responsible, and beneficial kind of way. So, please keep in touch. So that's the end of my slides, but I just wondered whether I might bring this chat screen over and see, Heather, is there a chance to answer some of these questions, do you think? Are you still there? Just looking through some of the chat now. Yeah, so Tony, I'm just reading yours that what's good in our system of education compared to what needs to change. I think you're right, needs to happen slowly. Yeah, there's so much there, isn't there, in terms of what's happening in the current system and that ability to connect. So, I really appreciate that comment. You guys, hi, you guys. Have you been out for a coffee? Are you back?
No, we've just been doing some people making in the background here, actually, and just seeing what we can whip up as we listen to your webinar here, Kylie.
Putting in some social capabilities, and we've been mixing those up with a pinch of context, because that matters. And also keeping in mind that, where we're coming from, this majority way of thinking, what the challenges are to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our diverse learners. One of the things that struck me when you were speaking about that is something that I have as a take home myself. And yes, we've got plenty of time. If you want to have a look through, scroll and identify any of those questions or comments in the chat that you would like to address. I also have another question, but I'll leave you to have a look through that first, Kylie, and then maybe if we have time, I'll address that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I hope you've got a good recipe there when you're mixing that stuff up too. Make sure you share it with me if you have. Yeah, so I'm just sort of flicking through here and I'm reading Marcel's comments about teaching during lockdown, and I think, I heard this a lot, that that actually it was hugely beneficial to be able to get to know your students. And I found that with my students here too. I laughed with them and said, teaching face to face, there's a lot of that nuanced stuff, and I think especially teaching this kind of thing, it felt really hard in an online environment. But there were some benefits of, they were inviting me into their house and into their space, and I would often see family members, walk past in the background. I could see most of the time they were in bed with laptops sort of flipped up, and while we were waiting to come online, we would have a bit of a chat about, what was going on in their house, who was that screaming out in the background, and so on. And so all that relationship building, I agree, Marcel, is hugely important when we take on the teaching of these types of capabilities. Do you want to, I think I'm sort of, I've had a quick skim through here, but the other ones might be more relevant to that first question around reasons why people wanted to be a teacher. And I love that too, this just looking at different ways we've been inspired into teaching. And like I shared with you, for me, I think I thought it was going to be a lot more unproblematic, and I was going to be this inspiring almost savior, if you like, with young people. And so it's been really nice over the last not just last few years, it's been a lot of years for me in this space to be challenged and to think about, well, who are you to say that this is the way people should behave and act in the world and in society? And, if you're actually going to stand up there and teach this stuff, then by Joe's, take the time to unpack it with your students, make sure that, it relates to their worlds, and make sure you do a bloody good job of it, really, because it's a huge privilege, isn't it?
And I think, Kylie, as you talk about different skills and capabilities and contexts, I have a very fond memory of sitting in a leadership meeting with my principal a couple of years ago, and he explicitly told the rest of the HODs at school that the only department in the school that explicitly teaches employability skills is the physical education department, and the whole room went silent, because he was generally more of your old school mentality, and that was him openly saying, actually, we are nothing without our physical education curriculum, and what they do and how they do it is actually leading in a lot of things that we need in the future. So I think I think that wraps up nicely what you've been talking about this morning around those changes in context and how we actually make it beneficial for our students and explicitly teach what we need to teach.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, isn't it great seeing the faces in the staff room when the penny drops with our colleagues sometimes? It's nice, for them to understand, a little bit more depth about what we set out to do. And, like I said before, I do think it's a huge privilege, but I also think we've got this responsibility to not just, oversimplify it as well. Yeah, cool.
Kylie, just looking back, I noted here when you were putting up this is before the provocations, you had 5 slides. On the second one, the information you wrote was, how are the skills and capabilities that we thought were important for us to learn as young people different for today's world? And there were a couple of things. Celia asked if those skills and capabilities were different or in fact it was the context that changed, and therefore sometimes, you know, that those skills and capabilities remained the same, although contextualised differently. And that you mentioned an article, a reference to authors, and I picked up that you suggested that was a good read, and I wondered if you had on you the names of those authors, and whether you'd be willing to share that with us.
Yeah, I do. Oh, that sounded like a bit of feedback. So the article around, you know, you're talking about the one with the new forms of physical activity and so on. Is that the one?
Yeah, I think it was. It was, slide 2.
Yeah. So that article was written by Justin O'Connor and Dawn Penny, and what I can do is, can I put a link somewhere or add something to a recording maybe, just because I haven't got the title right in front of me. It only got published this year, but it was a really good one around this idea that patterns of physical activity participation are changing quite significantly in the world, and yet we possibly persist with some teaching of skills and capabilities in a fairly traditional context, or, you know, in the idea that we're preparing them for quite formally structured sports. So I really like that article in terms of, you know, it's calling for physical educators to respond to that change, and think about how we can align our programs to some of these other types of activities that are going on.
I think Celia's come to the fore, and she's got a link there, and a possible title: Informal Sport and Future Curriculum.
Yeah, good one. Yeah. Legend, Celia, thank you. And, you know, I like Celia's comment too about the you know, that the context in which we use those skills has changed quite remarkably. I think I was showing you guys as this started, Kirsten Petrie popped this 1933 syllabus on my desk. They've been doing a bit of a clear out here at the university, which is, this feels a real gem to have. And so I must tonight go through and just see whether, Celia, those some of those skills from our Strand C are in fact in this old syllabus, and whether it is just the context that sort of changes. You know, there is something here about you know, nutrition and Weetabix, and that some children are easily tired because they're not having their Ovaltine, so that's quite interesting.
So it's advertising and sponsorship way back then as well.
Right in the front of the curriculum, isn't it great?
Yeah. Pride of place.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Emily's acknowledging that, you know, you're getting into a great project of study for your PhD, and this idea that, you know, we think there's no one way of thinking, but perhaps there is one way that we're supposed to act and behave, and if we think critically about that, where does that leave us? And she's put an exclamation mark there, blimmin' critical thinking, which exactly, I think, sums that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these topics that, I mean, I've definitely been grappling with it for years, and I think it's sort of when you start to unpack it, and you unpack some of those Tinning comments and those Arnold ones, which flip you right back to, you know, is this even, is this our kind of mandate here? And looking at and making sure that we understand our purpose, I think, is a really good start too. So, you know, if we can't kind of do that at the outset, then all this other stuff, you know, goes well over our head, doesn't it, if we haven't got a clear purpose? Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, what a great day. I think
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, if others have been as fortunate as we have, and to be involved in all 4 of these amazing presentations on day 1, then I think there's, you know, a lot of people going home tonight to ruminate on a whole lot of really good ideas around our ways of thinking for planning, our pedagogies, our quality practice, and even, you know, what's at the core of what we're trying to achieve when we're teaching in HPE. So I think it's been a hugely enlightening day, and fabulous, Kylie, that you were willing to give up your time, and Pens, thanks you very much. And on behalf of ourselves and of our membership, We are so fortunate we've still got really great people to call on who are willing to give up their time and participate in this type of PLD, which has some benefits. Not being face-to-face is unfortunate in lots of ways, but we're finding that this will probably create a bank of really good reference material and resources to go back to for our members and for those who have ticketed for our conference. So thank you for concluding things for us on day one. 2 days to go. We're in pretty good position, I think, for having what will be a very successful and new version of our PENS conference for 2020. So thanks again, Kylie, and we hope to see your name come up on the attendees coming up. Lots of people are saying that you rock, and they're waiting to probably hear from you at some stage, but a big thank you on behalf of everybody. We'll close now.
Cool. Thank you.